5:12 a.m. The alarm didn't go off. Michael just woke up, the way someone shoots up from underwater. Tight chest, dry mouth. The kind of morning when the body wakes before the mind because it senses something is off. He sat on the edge of the bed for nearly a minute, staring at his hands as they shook slightly. It wasn't the cold, it was fear. Outside, the sun hadn't risen yet. Inside him, neither had anything else. On the nightstand sat a crumpled envelope, the bill he hadn't been able to pay. No surprise, just another reminder that his life was narrowing faster than he could keep up. He rubbed his face, took a deep breath, and tried to stand. But in that moment, something inside him cracked. Something small, quiet, invisible to anyone else, but devastating to him. The silent feeling that he had failed his own family. The house was still asleep, his wife in the room next door, drained from trying to hold their emotional and financial world together while he tried to figure things out. His daughter, wrapped in her pink blanket, breathing softly, blissfully unaware that her father was on the verge of coming apart. Michael opened the hallway door slowly, as if crossing an invisible border. He looked toward the living room, then at the table where, years ago, he made plans, studied business ideas, set goals, believed. Now everything was dusty, silent, like his life had been put on pause. He closed his eyes, and in that single second, just that one, Michael admitted something he'd been hiding from himself. He no longer knew if he was winning or just surviving. But it hadn't always been this way. Before everything fell apart, Michael was the kind of man who seemed unshakable. He'd worked 20 years as a carpenter, respected in the neighborhood, at work, among friends. He was the guy who figures it out, the guy who makes it happen, the kind of man no one would ever imagine broken. But the 2008 crash ripped everything out by the roots. First came the contract cuts, then the layoff from the construction company, and finally the knockout punch, a bad investment made in a desperate hope to bounce back fast. He lost money, lost time, lost the confidence he had in his own future. He even lost the way he saw his own worth. Over time, the weight of all of it seeped into everything, the way he talked, the way he dreamed, the way he looked in the mirror. And maybe the hardest part, the way his wife began looking at him, not with disdain, but with a quiet worry, the kind that hurts more than any criticism. Michael walked into the kitchen, turned on the faucet, let the water run over his hands as if it could wash the weight off his shoulders. It couldn't. So, he sat at the table, staring at the envelope. And that's when something unexpected happened. A thought. Small, fragile, but different. I can't keep living like this. It wasn't motivation. It wasn't inspiration. It was something simpler and deeper. The instinct of a man who realizes he's running out of time. Suddenly, the feeling of failure made room for something else. The question that changes the life of any man past 40. Is it still possible to turn this around? That thought didn't fix anything that day, but it changed everything. Because for the first time in a long time, Michael felt he could try something, anything, one step, a beginning. He just didn't know his turning point would start in the place he least expected, with that envelope he hated looking at.
Michael stared at the envelope the way you look at an old enemy. It wasn't just a bill. It was a mirror, a reminder of everything he'd been avoiding. His life had shrunk. His dreams had been pushed aside. And worse than anything, He was starting to accept that smaller version of himself. He took a deep breath, opened the envelope, and saw the amount he already knew. But this time, something shifted. The humiliation that usually came with it was replaced by something else, clearer, sharper, more honest. If he didn't do something, this wasn't going to stop. It wouldn't get better on its own. It wouldn't fix itself. It wouldn't work out with time. That debt wasn't just financial. It was a final warning that he'd been dragging his own story along, pushing his fate further down the road, and time was collecting its price. The ticking of the wall clock sounded louder than usual. Each tick marked more than seconds. It marked opportunities slipping by. Suddenly, Michael remembered something his father used to say when he was still a kid. The worst prison is the one we build inside our own mind. That morning, sitting at the kitchen table with the weak light slipping through the window, he realized that's exactly where he was, trapped from the inside, locked in by the fear of trying again, by the fear of failing again, by the weight of a past that should have been buried long ago but still ruled his present. He stood and walked to his daughter's room, watching her sleep. Her calm breathing felt like a quiet reminder. She trusted him. Even without knowing it, she believed her father was someone who would do what needed to be done. And it was in that moment, not in books, not in motivational videos, not in cliches, that the first spark of change appeared. Michael felt shame, but not the kind that crushes a man. A different one, the kind that wakes you up, the kind that says, "You're capable of more than this, and you know it." He stepped out of his room and went back to the living room. His eyes passed over the table where he once made plans, and for the first time in years, he pulled out the chair and sat down. His hands were still shaking, the fear was still there, but something inside him was finally standing. He took a deep breath and opened the old laptop that barely worked. The screen took its time to light up, as if it were tired too. But when it finally flickered to life, Michael saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. The possibility of trying again. But before typing any search, any plan, any note, he just stared at the blinking cursor on that white background. That little cursor on that white background felt like it was asking, "What are you going to do now, Michael?" He didn't know the answer, but he knew what he couldn't do anymore: stay stuck. And so for the first time in a long while, he made a move that might look small, but only men who've been broken understand the weight of it. He began. He typed one line, then another, and another. It wasn't a master plan. It wasn't a breakthrough idea. It was just a start, a rough draft, a flicker. But in that moment, something shifted inside him. His life was still chaotic. The bills were still unpaid. The fears were still real, but the paralysis had cracked. Michael had no idea that this simple act, sitting down, opening the laptop, and starting, would become the beginning of the biggest turning point of his life. And it would also be the first step toward facing the hardest question any man over 40 can ask himself: who do I want to be from here on out?
The days that followed weren't heroic. There was no divine breakthrough, no sudden explosion of motivation. The truth is that Michael woke up the next morning the same way: heavy, tired, half-defeated. But for the first time in years, he woke up knowing he had made a decision. He was going to try. And trying, for a man over 40, is far more frightening than it looks. The first thing he did was return to the table in the living room. The same table where, years earlier, he'd sketched out the most ambitious plans of his life. Now it looked smaller, as if it were reflecting the state he was in. Even so, Michael sat down, took a deep breath, opened the slow, old, exhausted laptop. It felt like looking at himself. But when the screen lit up, something inside him lit up too. He started by searching for simple things, small things,
possibilities he would have dismissed as silly years ago. But now they were doors. Maybe narrow, maybe fragile, but still doors. And men at rock bottom can't afford to ignore doors. In the first few days, he failed, many times. The computer froze. The plans made no sense. The ideas felt weak. His confidence wavered like an old rope about to snap. But something in him had changed. He wasn't running anymore. When frustration hit, he breathed, closed his eyes, and kept going. Not because he was inspired, but because he was tired of running from his own life. One night, his daughter walked into the living room without him noticing. She had woken up to get a drink of water. She saw her father sitting there, focused, the dim glow of the laptop lighting his worn-out face. And she did something simple. She placed her small hand on his shoulder and said, "Daddy, you're working again." Michael almost cried. Not because it was sweet, but because it hurt. "Yeah, I'm trying," he answered with a fragile smile. She gave him a sleepy smile and went back to her room. But that question, "You're working again," echoed inside him like an ancient calling. The next morning, something unexpected happened. He woke up before the alarm. His body was still heavy. His mind was still noisy. But there was an invisible shift. He didn't feel defeated. He felt responsible. He got up, made coffee, sat down at the table again. The cursor blinked on the screen. This time, it didn't feel like pressure. It felt like an invitation. That's when he began writing what would become his first real draft of change. Nothing grand, nothing perfect, just a short list. What can I do today? What can I learn this week? What can I build this month? Small, practical, doable. And for the first time in a long time, he finished something. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't guaranteed, but it was his. The following days were still hard. The debt was still there. The routine was still heavy. His wife still watched him with that familiar mix of love and concern. But now something quiet was shifting, inside the house and inside him. Little by little, his wife began to notice he was different, not apathetic anymore, not lost in his own silence, but present, attentive, alive. She didn't say anything. Women rarely do. But he noticed it in the way she set the coffee on the table, in the way she looked at him at the end of the day. There was hope there, small, fragile, but real. And then came the moment that truly changed everything. One night, late, Michael was sitting at the table again, his eyes tired, his body worn, his mind spinning. But he was there, fighting. His wife walked in quietly, thinking he was asleep. When she saw him awake, working, she let out a soft sigh and said, "I'm glad you're trying again." Simple, no drama, no speech. But for Michael, it felt like breathing again after being underwater for far too long. That trying again didn't just mean work. It meant he was back. It meant she saw something in him that he had stopped seeing. And in that exact moment, not at the beginning, not at rock bottom, but right there, in the middle of the struggle, tired, imperfect, pushing forward, Michael realized that a turning point never happens all at once. It happens like this: one step, then another, until one day you look back and realize you're no longer in the same place. Michael's turning point wasn't explosive. It was quiet. It was steady. It was one in the dark when no one was watching. It was the turning point of a man who, after years of merely surviving, finally decided to live again.